There's a person in your life, maybe from your past, maybe right now, who treated you badly. Cold, critical, unpredictable, never quite there. And you stayed. You tried harder. You loved them more, not less. And then there was probably another person. Someone kind, consistent. Someone who actually showed up. And within weeks, sometimes days, you felt almost nothing. Or worse, you felt something crawling under your skin. Something that told you to run. Here is the question I want you to hold for the entire length of this video. Because the answer to it will rewrite everything you think you know about yourself. What if the problem was never your taste in people? What if the pull toward the person who hurt you, and the push away from the person who didn't? What if both of those reactions were coming from the exact same source? A source installed in you so early and so quietly that you've been living inside it your entire life without ever knowing it was there. That's what we're talking about today. And I'm warning you now, by the time this ends, some part of you is going to feel deeply, uncomfortably seen. Because the dark truth about why you attract people who hurt you isn't about your choices. It's about your programming. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Stay with me. The pattern. Let me describe a feeling. Tell me if you recognize it. You meet someone. Intense. Magnetic. There's something just slightly out of reach about them. They give you just enough warmth to keep you reaching, then pull back just enough to make you question everything. You can't stop thinking about them. Your brain is running a loop. You tell your friends you know it's probably not good for you, but there's this chemistry. This electricity. This thing you cannot explain and definitely cannot walk away from. Now let me describe a different feeling. You meet someone else. Warm. Present. They text back within an hour. They mean what they say and say what they mean. On paper, and even out loud, they sound wonderful. But something feels wrong. You can't name it. You find yourself looking for flaws. Feeling restless. Bored, even though nothing is actually boring. And eventually, without fully understanding why, you let it fade. Here's the brutal question. Which one did you call chemistry? And which one did you call a non-starter? Most people watching this already know the answer. Most have spent years blaming themselves for it. Calling themselves self-destructive. Broken. Wondering what is fundamentally wrong with them that they keep choosing chaos over peace. But what if the choice was never really a choice at all? What if something much older and much deeper than conscious preference was doing the choosing for you? That is not an excuse. That is a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is where the real work begins. Imagine that the day you were born, a blueprint began writing itself for how you experience human connection. Every interaction, every moment of warmth, every moment of coldness, every hug, every slammed door, every time someone was there and every time they weren't, all of it was being written into that blueprint. Line by line. Day by day. And here's the terrifying part. Most of that blueprint was finished before you had a single conscious memory. Researchers call it your internal working model. It's essentially the brain's permanent first impression of what human relationships are. Not what they should be. Not what you were told they were. What they actually felt like, in the wordless, body-level experience of being a small child entirely dependent on someone else for survival. And the brain has one overriding rule about that blueprint. Familiar equals safe. Not good. Not healthy. Not loving. Familiar. Think about what your brain's only job was in those early years. It wasn't to be happy. It was to survive. And to survive, it needed to predict. A cold environment is not a good environment. But it is a predictable one. And predictable, to a developing nervous system, is safe enough. It's workable. It's a world you know how to navigate. There are windows in early development, what neuroscientists call sensitive periods, where the brain isn't just learning about the world. It's being shaped by it, like wet concrete that eventually hardens. The patterns laid down during those windows don't stay as memories you can examine. They become the ground you stand on. They become the air you breathe. They become the invisible filter through which every single person you meet for the rest of your life gets run. And when you finally meet someone who fits that blueprint, someone who recreates the exact emotional frequency of your earliest relationships, it doesn't feel like a warning. It feels like coming home. I want to give you a concept that's going to change the way you understand every relationship you've ever had. It comes from developmental psychology, and it's called shark music. Picture a scene: a calm ocean, blue water, golden afternoon light, a child playing near the shore. Peaceful, right? Now keep that exact same scene. Same water, same light, same child. But add music. Low, slow, ominous. That creeping two-note pulse from every horror film you've ever seen. Suddenly the scene is terrifying. Your body is already bracing. Nothing in the scene changed. Only the signal beneath it. Here's what I need you to really absorb. What if you've been walking into every relationship with shark music playing? Not in your ears, in your nervous system. A signal laid down so early and so deep that you've never been able to distinguish it from reality. This is what it looks like in practice. When you meet someone emotionally unavailable, critical, or unpredictable, your nervous system doesn't sound an alarm. Because that frequency matches the blueprint. The music that plays is familiar. And familiar means safe. So what registers in your conscious mind as attraction, as chemistry, as that feeling that this person is different, is actually your nervous system recognizing a pattern it was built to survive. But when you meet someone stable, kind, genuinely available, your nervous system goes haywire. Because that frequency doesn't match the blueprint. That's uncharted territory. And to a nervous system built for a specific kind of chaos, the absence of chaos isn't peace. It's the most terrifying sound of all. So the shark music plays. And you feel it as boredom, as suspicion, as the ick, as a vague wrongness you can't explain. And you walk away from the safest person in the room because every signal in your body is telling you they're dangerous. You weren't making a bad choice. You were responding to a signal. A signal that made perfect, logical, survival-based sense once, a long time ago, in a very different room. But here's what I haven't told you yet. And this is the part that will make you look at your own history with completely different eyes. That signal? That pattern you've been running? It wasn't just a wound. It was a work of genius. The hypervigilance. The emotional radar that scans a room for tension the moment you walk in. The ability to read someone's mood from the way they said 3 words. The way you manage other people's emotions before they even know those emotions exist. The way you became, without ever being taught, an expert in anticipating what someone needed so you could provide it before they had the chance to be disappointed. Those aren't wounds. Those are skills. Extraordinary, sophisticated, hard-won skills that took years to develop. Think about what that child was doing. Alone, undersized, without resources or language or power, they looked at an environment that wasn't safe and they solved it. They developed real-time emotional intelligence that most trained adults cannot match. They learned to read micro-expressions, to modulate their own behavior in milliseconds, to become whatever the room needed them to be so that the room would stay survivable. That's not damage. That's genius under pressure. The problem isn't the skill set. The problem is the contract it came with. Those skills were built for a specific environment, one defined by scarcity, unpredictability, and the constant need to earn love that should have been freely given. And in that kind of environment, those skills work perfectly. In a relationship with someone hurtful, you're competent. You know the rules. You know the moves. You've been practicing this game your entire life. You are, in the most painful possible sense, good at it. But in a relationship with someone healthy, the skills misfire. Your radar picks up threats that aren't there. Your hypervigilance reads kindness as a setup. Your nervous system, trained for chaos, interprets peace as the quiet before something terrible happens. You are a masterpiece of adaptation, running in the wrong environment. And here is the cruelest part of all. The part that locks the trap shut. When a child grows up in an environment where their needs aren't met, neglected, criticized, loved conditionally, or simply never truly seen, they don't conclude that their environment has failed them. They can't. Because that conclusion is unsurvivable. If the people responsible for keeping you alive are broken, you have no future. The child's mind cannot hold that truth. So it does the only thing it can. It turns the conclusion inward. I am not loved becomes I am unlovable. Not because the environment was broken, but because if the problem is me, then the problem is within my control. If I try harder, behave better, need less, become more, maybe the love I need will finally come. And that belief, forged in the fire of early survival, becomes the verdict. The thing you carry. The thing you've been, in ways too quiet and too deep to see, organizing your entire emotional life around. Here's how you know if you're carrying this verdict. When someone treats you poorly and you stay, some part of you, beneath all the justifications, experiences their cruelty as confirmation, as truth, as someone finally seeing you the way you secretly see yourself. And when someone treats you well, their kindness feels like a lie. Like they must not know you yet. Like it's only a matter of time before they see what you see. This isn't low self-esteem in the casual sense. This is a deep, structural belief about your own worth that was installed before you had a single word for it. And it runs your relationships like a hidden algorithm, silently sorting people, filtering out the ones whose behavior doesn't match the prediction, gravitating toward the ones who confirm the code. Trauma doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's a parent who was never quite there. A household where emotions weren't allowed. A childhood where you were loved, but only when you were easy. Only when you were good. Only when you didn't need too much. That is enough. That is enough to write the verdict. And here is the darkest truth. You have been using other people's cruelty to prove a verdict that was never yours to carry. You inherited it. You did not earn it. So the question is, when do you give it back? Most psychology videos offer you a list here. 5 steps to heal your attachment style. 3 habits to break the pattern. I'm not going to do that. Not because those things are useless, but because a list treats this like a strategy problem. And this is not a strategy problem. This is an identity problem. The real work begins with a single shift in the question you ask yourself. Most people in this pattern spend their lives asking, what is wrong with me that I keep choosing this? And that question, however sincere, is a trap, because it starts from the premise of the verdict. It uses the pattern as evidence of your brokenness. It's the wound asking the wound to diagnose itself. The question that actually opens something is this attraction, or is this recognition? Because recognition feels identical to attraction. Recognition has electricity. Recognition feels like coming home. But what you're coming home to matters enormously. Sometimes you're coming home to love. And sometimes you're coming home to a familiar frequency of pain that your nervous system has been trying to return to since childhood. Because that pain, at least, is known. At least it's workable. At least you know how to survive it. Learning to tell the difference, in the body, in real time, before the pattern completes itself. That is the skill. And it starts with what researchers call naming the shark music. When the kind, available person suddenly feels wrong, pause. Don't trust that feeling as instinct. It isn't instinct. It's memory. It's your nervous system running old code in a new situation. Name it out loud if you have to. This feeling is not danger. This is novelty. And novelty is survivable. You don't have to act on the discomfort. You don't have to exit the room just because your alarm system misfired. The deeper work, the work that actually rewires the code rather than just managing its outputs, is what clinicians call building a coherent narrative. Tracing the story all the way back. Not to assign blame. Not to excuse yourself from responsibility. But to locate the origin of the verdict, and to seriously ask whether it was ever actually true. Here's what the research says clearly: the limitations of the people who shaped you were a them thing, not a you thing. Their inability to see your worth was not evidence of your worth. It was evidence of their capacity. A child's need to reach for connection, that was never evidence of defect. That was evidence of exactly what it was: a child doing what children do, in an environment that wasn't built for them. You did not fail that environment. That environment failed you. And the final step, the one that changes not just your relationships but your fundamental experience of being alive, is learning to separate a state from a trait. I feel unworthy right now. That is a state. It passes. It has a source. It's the old code activating. I am unworthy. That is a trait. A permanent condition. An identity. And it is not real. It was never real. It was a survival strategy dressed up as a truth. The moment you can hold those two things apart, even for a second, even imperfectly, you've broken something in the chain. Because the chain only works when you mistake the signal for the reality. When you remember the shark music is playing, the ocean stops being terrifying. It becomes just what it is: water, light. And you, standing at the edge of it, deciding for the first time that you don't have to jump in just because you always did before. Here's the truth I want you to carry out of this video. If you grew up in an emotional desert, you may always, to some degree, speak the language of love with an accent. The old code doesn't disappear. The shark music doesn't go permanently silent. Some version of that pull, toward the familiar, toward the known, may visit you for the rest of your life. But a visitor is not a resident. And a whisper is not a verdict. The child who decided they were unlovable didn't find a truth. They found a way to survive an unsurvivable situation. They did what they had to do. And they kept you here, still searching, which means they did their job. They got you through. You don't need them to do that job anymore. The most radical thing you can do, more radical than any technique, more radical than any framework, is to let someone be kind to you without immediately looking for the catch. To sit inside the discomfort of being truly seen by someone who actually stays. To resist the pull back toward the wreckage, not because the wreckage doesn't feel like home, but because you finally understand why it does. Walking away from a familiar hurt and toward an unfamiliar peace, that is not weakness. That is the moment the pattern ends. Not because it stopped feeling familiar, but because you decided that familiar is no longer enough. That moment can start right now. Not by choosing a different person, by asking a different question. Not what is wrong with me, but what story have I been living that was written for me before I could speak? And more importantly, who do I want to be now that I finally have the words? One thing I'd genuinely like to know: at what moment did you first suspect that what you were calling chemistry might actually be familiarity? Was there a specific relationship where you saw the pattern for the first time? Leave it below, not because it makes good content, but because the person reading it might be living inside a pattern they've never had a name for. And your story might be the one that finally gives them one. If this video shifted something for you, subscribe. We make videos that go somewhere most psychology content is afraid to go. New video every week. I'll see you there.